Hello and welcome to Spectrum Live, the coronavirus series. Today we're talking about education and preparing for the return to school, a really important issue right now. My name is Tom Purser, I'm the Head of Campaigns at the National Autistic Society and I'll be your host for today. And remember that whilst we're not coming to you live, we are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube, so you can leave comments, ask questions, and please do share this with your friends so they can find it too. But thank you very much for tuning in today. Coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, has, as we know, affected people's lives right around the world. But we know it's affected autistic people particularly. Even before the pandemic, autistic people and their families struggled to get the right care, support and understanding that they need. And the pandemic has made this even worse. We carried out a recent survey and autistic people told us that the pandemic has affected their anxiety levels, their mood and their ability to think clearly, particularly in terms of school and education. We're going to be working really hard at the National Autistic Society and campaigning on these and related issues over the coming months. We're going to be telling the government what they need to do to make sure autistic people and their families get the support they need. But today's show isn't about that, it's about the information and advice that we think autistic people and their families need right now to help them prepare to return to school. Students across Scotland and Northern Ireland have already been returning to school in a phased approach, and from September all children across all age groups are expected to return to school in England. In today's episode we're going to discuss the impact of coronavirus on education, and we're going to be talking about some great tips to help you, your loved ones, prepare to return to school and to cope with the changed school environment that is going to be in place from the beginning of term. That could be school, it could be college, it could even be university, and we hope all this information is going to be helpful whatever the age of your child or young adult. All the information in today's episode is correct at the time of broadcast, but government guidance and rules are changing all the time, particularly around things like local lockdowns. So do make sure you check for our website for the latest information. We have a dedicated area of our website called the Coronavirus Hub. All the information from tonight can be found from there via links or directly there, as well as the latest guidance and updates around schools and education. You can find that at autism.org.uk/coronavirus. And as I said, if you've got questions as we go, please do put them in the comments. There's going to be people responding to them as we go, and we'll be sharing links to everything we talk about at the end. So, on we go, and let's introduce the panel. On our panel today, we have Kiri Lynn Gardner, autistic woman, parent to an autistic teenager, and an educational professional in a specialist school. Kiri Lynn, thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about your role, the work you do at your school, and yourself?
I have a son who's 16 and he's on the autistic spectrum, as am I. I work in a deaf school, which I look after a small cohort of the young people that also are on the autistic spectrum. So our main sort of special need at the school is their deafness, and I just pick up those children that have got the ASC diagnosis, and I support them through the secondary education alongside the teachers and other professionals that we have at the school.
And how have you been coping with home learning and home teaching during lockdown?
It's been very difficult, and there's been very different approaches. We've had to think on our feet very quickly, which for me, I like to plan ahead. So that's been extremely hard personally for myself, to be able to all of a sudden not have face-to-face contact, to work from home, to use modern technology quite quickly. We've had to establish Teams, Microsoft Teams, and use that as a teaching method, especially with our children. They rely on facial expressions anyway. So that's been really important that we got the hang of that very, very quickly. And then, of course, I've got two children. I've got my son who's year 11, no GCSEs, and he's on the autistic spectrum. So trying to organised him, and the fact that he's been studying for almost 2 years not to have the exams has been a huge emotional roller coaster, should we say. And then I've got a daughter who's year 9 going into year 10. So she's had the other extreme where there's been so much work and then having to try and manage going into work, supporting the key worker children, as well as working from home, supporting the children that, because we work, our children are from all over the country. So it's been personally very difficult for me to manage that.
Well, really glad that you've been able to join us today. Thanks very much, Kiri Lynn. Next up, we have Hazel Lim. Hazel is a multilingual autism specialist at Chinese in Wales Association. They are a charitable organisation whose ethos is to deliver services that will make a positive impact on the lives of Chinese people in Wales. She's also a winner of an Autism Professional Award earlier last year. Hazel's husband and son are both on the autism spectrum. Hazel, thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, your family, and your role at the Chinese in Wales Association?
Right, okay, so I'm Hazel. At home, I'm a wife to an autistic husband and who has got really high level of sensitivity to noise. And I'm a mother, of course. And during the lockdown, I'm also a hairdresser, piano teacher to my 3 special needs children, and also a cleaner at home, a chef, everything. So I've got 3 special needs children, with one has got autism diagnosis, one on the assessment pathway to be diagnosed, and one with hearing impairment. So, and I work full time. So during this lockdown, that I have to oversee several projects for the organization, but I run my autism project that I have over 30 vulnerable Chinese families living with autism to care for. So this family, they have a lot of barriers such as language barrier, cultural stigma. They're not usually able to share with their family or friends about the difficulties that they face because of the stigma that's surrounding in our culture. So it's been even more isolated for many families during this period of time.
Well, Hazel, what a busy few months it must have been for you and your family. Really pleased you've been able to join us today, and look forward to talking to you and your son later in the show. And finally, we have Andy Cutting from the National Autistic Society. Andy is Specialist Exclusions and Alternative Provision Advice Coordinator. Andy, perhaps you can explain a little bit about what your role at the charity involves, and can you just tell us a little bit about what advice you're telling teachers that to give to parents of autistic children at the moment to provide some reassurance?
Hi, thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I'm Andy. I run the school exclusion service and have been doing that for the last 7 years. Really enjoy it. We support parents and carers of autistic children and young people who've been excluded from school or at risk of exclusion, but we also provide information for teachers to help them overcome the barriers to inclusion. Just a bit of background. Before I joined the National Autistic Society, I was a teacher, primary school teacher, and also deputy head, and that was for 17 years. And in that time, in almost every class I taught, there was an autistic child, at least one autistic child. And I've also done math tutoring as well with autistic children. In terms of sort of advice for teachers at this time, I think really it boils down to one thing really, and that is to listen to parents, because parents, after all, are the experts in their child. Nobody on planet Earth knows their child better than the parent does. So although this is a very hectic time of year preparing for the autumn term and this massive reopening, I would just urge teachers to take time out of their schedule to arrange a meeting with a parent and to listen to what their concerns are, listen to their knowledge of their child, and also then to agree reasonable adjustments for that child so that the transition back into school can hopefully be as smooth as possible, really.
Great, thanks Andy, and thank you for joining us today. And just to remind everyone watching at home that if you need to access the school exclusion service, you can find details on our website. We'll also be sharing information as we go through. But I know both from personal experience and professional just what fantastic work the service does, how many people it helps, and what a real difference it can make to people's lives. So great to have you here with us today, Andy. So one of the things that we've been doing at the National Autistic Society, and what you can find on our website, is producing resources and information to try and help families and teachers at this difficult time as preparing to go back to school. We have on our website prepared a resource specifically for teachers and parents. But Kiri Lynn, I'm going to come to you now. What adjustments have you been making at your school as you to support students?
So the adjustment. So I speak to the children one-to-one, so I do interventions with them. So it is really key that you communicate. Communication is the main thing here. So yeah, speaking to parents, like Andy said, they're the experts. They know their children better than anybody. So that's the sort of thing that we've been sort of doing. So the flexibility, the support of both the parents and the pupils. It's a very unusual time at the moment. There's no right or wrong way of looking after your young person. You've got to go with what they need at that time. So to make sure the contact lines are always open, and making sure that you can. So I've been offering every Wednesday during that summer holidays that I connect with the young people. So with teams, you can set up a small group, and you can chat to the pupils individually and the parents as well. So that's been a huge help, hopefully, and signposting them. I've been signposting to National Autistic Society, Mind charities have been doing lots of things about mental health and well-being, which again, I think for our young people and people on the spectrum, that is incredibly important, that they're happy within themselves, because it is such an unusual time at the moment. So little steps like that, preparing them and preparing them to get back in September, it's going to be really hard.
And what's your school been doing so far? And do you have any tips around helping get ready for that transition back to school?
Yeah, so what we've sort of been doing is, like I said, we've been speaking to all the teachers and the teaching assistants, getting them prepared so they're ready to accept the children back. With a small cohort that are the ones on the autistic spectrum, we've been making sure that we have that contact with them, that we put things in place. They know the plan ahead of time, social stories. So I've even devised a risk assessment type document, because I do risk assessments for the school for the activities. So with that, the child can put down their concerns or their risk that they feel what might happen. So because we've got children from all over the country, if their area gets closed down, what would we do? So then I answer it and I break it down for them so they can visually see it. So it helps the parents and it helps the young people as well to take ownership of that. And talk through the concerns, recognise that emotion, and remain honest with them. I find it very difficult to lie. So if a child asks me a question, I sometimes can be brutally honest, but I think that's what we need. And I think that helps, because as soon as you start saying, well, I'm not sure, or don't worry about that, then you're going to worry about it. So it's making sure that the school are aware of that. And then so I will send those tips to the teachers and the TAs and the staff as well. And that's the sort of thing. Our school have already sent out a document ready. My son's school, because he goes to a mainstream school, they've already sent out. He's already had team meetings with his sort of person that he's going to look after, that's going to look after him, because he's going into sixth form. So of course we don't know what that's going to be like. So they've broken it down really well. His school have been fantastic, because they've listened to me. They've had that conversation with me, and I think that's what parents need to do, is to speak to the school, get that support in place. My son's not statemented, he hasn't got an EHC plan, so of course that's even more difficult, because there's certain things you don't get if you haven't got the EHC plan. So we've made sure that we've spoken to the form teacher and that they've put things in place that he's reassured that when he goes back, he's got that support from a Senko, from the ASC advisor that goes into the school, any other support staff, or if they are statemented or with the HC, the local education authority, they should be providing that for them. So it is making sure parents know what they're entitled to, what help and support's out there. And the National Autistic Society has it very clearly laid out. I've used your guides and sent that to parents already. I think that's really important.
That's great. And what great work you've been doing at your school, and really pleased that our information's been able to help with that. Andy, turning to you now, and Kiri Lynn's just talked about quite a lot of helpful tips there that people can be doing. Anything else from your perspective that parents can be doing to help prepare for that transition period?
Yeah, I think three things really. First of all, starting with the familiar. I'll talk more about that in a second. Then introduce the new changes, which are the protective measures that the school will be put in place to try and reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. And then thirdly, sharing the parents' knowledge and information with the school. So if we take each of those in turn, so starting with the familiar, anxiety is often linked to the unknown, particularly for autistic children. So if the child is returning to the same school they were in March, but moving up a year group, then one thing that parents can do is to request a visit to the school, hopefully, where the teacher or special needs coordinator, for example, can give them a guided tour to remind the child of the layout of the school. Where is the hall? Where are the toilets? Where's the classroom? Where's the playground? All those sort of, basic things. But, but really also homing in on little details as well, like, this is where you're going to put your coat. This is where you're going to put your bag. This is your locker. This is your teacher. This is your desk. All those sort of things will make a big difference to an autistic child. Now, if you can't arrange a visit, I know it's going to be difficult because we're still in the school holidays in England, Wales and Northern Ireland anyway. I know Scotland is back at school, of course, on the 12th of August. If you can't arrange a visit, maybe a teacher would agree to do like a little virtual tour, a little video tour of the school, or do a series of photos of particular places in the school. Also, I would urge parents to try and arrange some kind of a meeting with form teacher, class teacher, or special needs coordinator. That might have to be a virtual meeting, like a Zoom meeting. But again, that's a great chance for them to discuss any concerns they might have. So that's to do with sort of the things that haven't changed, to reassure the child that actually, the building's still there. All these things are exactly the same place. There's a number of staff who are the same, so that's good. But then to introduce the changes that are in school. Now, schools will have to communicate these changes to parents, and they might do it on the website, school website, or by email, for example. But what I urge parents to do is to contact the school and say, look, could you just make a reasonable adjustment, please? Because my child is autistic, we don't want to leave it to 2 days before the beginning of term to tell him or her about all these new changes. Could you let us know what the changes are in advance, maybe a week or two beforehand, hopefully, so that they can then be sort of introduced to the child in a way that they're going to be able to understand. So that might be through, again, through photos, for example, video, visual instructions, social stories where there are short descriptions of certain situations at school that are going to be different and explain why those things are happening, why those differences have been made. I'll talk a little bit more about individual protective measures a little bit later on in our talk. Just a couple of things just to pick up on, perhaps, to anticipate potential problems. One is that what children might find is that there's a bit of blurring that goes on, that there are all these new rules in place to keep everybody safe, and some children, some staff might let those drift a little bit and then go on the wrong side of the corridor or do this and that. And for some autistic children, that's going to be very, very difficult, and they might try and take the law into their own hands and start policing it. So that's something to tell the school about. And also the child might be very concerned if the school aren't applying those rules consistently. Okay, so that's about introducing the new changes. The final thing I would say is about, as I say, sharing information about your child with the school. A guide that I really like comes from the Autism Education Trust. You can get it online. It's called Working Together with Your Child's School. Lots of really great tips about how to build a really positive, constructive relationship with a school. But also the bulk of it is a questionnaire. And you can include your child in this as well. There's 36 statements in there about a child's autism needs. And the idea is you go through each one and you decide how important it is to your child. So is it essential, not needed, and so on. And when you've done all 36, rather than bombard the school with 36 kind of demands, which probably won't go down very well, the guide suggests you just pick five priorities. And that is, you can use that as a basis of this first sort of meeting with the class teacher or form teacher. And they're all positive things. They're not, they're not moans, they're not complaints. They're sort of, here are 5 ideas that I think are going to make a massive difference to my child when they start your class in September. So that I think is useful. Another idea is a pupil profile or pupil passport, which just gives a little overview of the child, the child's strengths, what they really love doing, but also the sort of things they find really difficult. And also, what strategies the parent may have developed over the years to try and help them to cope. And then I think another thing, that key thing to try and share and agree with the school as early on as possible is reasonable adjustments. So these are, changes to the way the school usually does things so that disabled pupils are not put at a disadvantage compared to non-disabled children. And I think it's worth highlighting as well that under the Equality Act and also the Disability Discrimination Act in Northern Ireland, this is an anticipatory duty. That means that schools should be thinking in advance about what's needed. Don't wait for 3 weeks of the new term to have passed and find that the child's really struggling. Now, before the start term, is the time to agree those reasonable adjustments and then obviously review them, and new adjustments might need to be made.
That's great, Andy. Because I know we're gonna come on to a few more of those in detail, but also talk a bit about what happens if that's not happening and where things go wrong. And just to remind everyone, the Autism Education Trust, you can find links to that on the National Autistic Society website, and we'll share the links as well at the end of the show and as we go. Hazel, coming to you now. What have you been doing to prepare your children for returning to school in September?
Right. Okay. So back to, if we talk a bit back to when at the beginning of during the lockdown. So during those times that at the very beginning, I have created a timetable for all my children to follow, and I think that works quite good. But then later on, as time changed, school has started to put in work and request work to be done online. Things has become more tricky because we don't have enough proper learning devices at home for the 3 children, and with all the different programs that school were using, that has took us a while to catch up. And for myself as a mother, it was totally impossible to play so many roles effectively, at the same time. Also, I have to work full time. So we then I have to make decision to say, we just take it easy, and you can just back to the timetable that we have created together at home. And to prepare them to go into the school, we have used the same timetable that we created that gradually changed from one column to something else. For example, that we have got one of the time that we do like outdoor fresh air. So those times that we change to PE instead. So we get some things from like video clip from the YouTube that to just try to to introduce them, to prepare them, that is what it's going to be like going to back to school. But with Noah, because Noah is very different from my other 2 children, and he is the only one that was in the comprehensive school. So with Noah, what I did to him was that because he liked to have as much information that in hand if possible, he likes to be in control, so that anytime that if I receive any emails or letter received from school, I'll keep Noah posted with all the progress that school has made, and that always keep him feeling safe. I think by doing that way, Noah he knows what is going on, and I encourage him to talk to his friend, but he's very reluctant to. He's very quiet. He likes to just be on his own. He feels it, because it creates anxiety every time he has to start talking to other people. So sometimes I'll speak to his friend's mother and then to tell him, oh, maybe, this is what Louis thinks, and just to give him a bit of information, what his friend might be doing, what his friend is thinking about going back to school, even though that he might not be able to make the initiative to get in touch with his friend. So there's the little things that we do to prepare him to go to school, because he is all autistic children, they're a bit different. So with Noah, he likes to be as much information as he could, and we know that school is going to make changes. We're still waiting. He has got questions, so sometimes I put down those questions, because he doesn't like me to just every time write to the school to ask teachers what's going on. So he is getting more reluctant to tell me with all his thoughts, but I pick it out sometimes from our conversation. So I'll take the note down and then I'll put them together and email the teachers that we always talk to, and then they're being quite helpful. So we are still waiting to hear from some of the arrangement they are going to make, because Noah, he is the rule spider. He doesn't like people to break rules. He get quite anxious about it. So there are a lot of little things that we really have to look out for.
Great, thanks, Hazel. And I think a really important point you made, and amongst all those excellent tips, is that every autistic person, every autistic child is different. So we know that not all the tips you'll be hearing today will work for everybody, but hopefully across everything you've just heard, there's going to be something in there for you. So thank you, Hazel. After several months in lockdown, many students are now having to deal with the anxiety of transitioning back to school or college or university. Sometimes they're old ones, sometimes a new one, sometimes without any support for that. Managing this transition, as we know, can be hugely anxiety provoking, both for the children and young people themselves, and cause difficulty for parents and families. We've got lots of resources on our coronavirus hub that can help with this. So we're going to take a little look now about how you can access those, and also how you can access the National Autistic Society's helpline to help you with these issues. For those of you just tuning in, we're talking about supporting autistic people, children and young adults with returning to school, college and university. And we're joined by Andy, Kiri Lynn, Hazel Lim and, I'm delighted, her son Noah. We're going to be talking to Noah now about his recent experiences. Noah's 12 years old and it's lovely to have him with us today. Noah, welcome to Spectrum Live. I've heard that your favourite subjects are maths and creative arts. How have the changes recently been for you?
It hasn't affected me too much because I can do the work normally in class without much help, so I can do it at home.
What help have you had from your school whilst you've been at home?
I haven't had really any support from school because I didn't really need it.
Has that made things harder, or has that been okay for you?
It's been okay.
Yeah, school they have been sending like emails, checking in every now and then. They do offer if no one wanted to go into school to do somewhere, but no, I prefer to stay at home. Yeah, he finds it easier, because going to school he knows it's going to be different, and he the routine is going to be all changed. So we decided that we just stay at home, that he feels that's better for him.
So will Noah be returning to school in September?
Yes.
He's very much looking forward to.
So what are you looking forward to getting back to, Noah, to doing again?
Like having a normal routine. Like I know when we're gonna do different things, like what time everything is.
And whilst you've been at home, is there any new things that you've learnt?
I learned how to set up a home recording studio.
Amazing.
Noah, he's very creative, so he has not. So to him, it's not new to draw a new drawing or creative amazing set of Lego. But to me, wow, that is really new, and it's amazing. He has been doing this all his life up until now, I would say, but he has done a lot of new creative model constructions during this time.
Great. And how do you feel about going back to school in September, Noah?
I feel like excited to go back to school.
And has Mum been able to help you get ready for it and not be so nervous?
Yes.
Good, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion at home because Noah's younger sister, Tia, she's going into year 7. So it's very new for her. So Noah has been telling a lot about school to Tia. So there's been a lot of discussion. I think that helped with Noah refreshing of his life in school. So it's been quite good because we are preparing Tia at the same time, so that we are talking about the pathway they're going to walk to school and how they're going to make arrangement to meet after school, things like that. So it's become more and more. We are all very excited.
Great. Well, Noah, it's been lovely talking to you. Thanks for joining us, and good luck for going back to school. Andy, I'm going to turn to you now. So, looking at what might be different about school when children go back, what sorts of things can autistic children expect to find at school?
So the government has set out a whole list of protective measures, as they put it, to try and reduce the risk of COVID-19 spreading further. In fact, we've got a list of those in a table, which is on our back to school information on our website, which you might want to look at. It's important to be aware of, not all schools have to do all of those things that are listed. Obviously, a small village school is going to be very different to a large, 2,000 student, secondary school, for example. From an autistic point of view, there'll be some positive and negative things about each one, really. And as Tom and Hazel have been saying, as every autistic child and adult is different, what one person likes will not be necessarily the same as another person. Just to give you an idea, one of the measures is that classrooms will be arranged differently. So if you were to walk into a classroom in September, or on the 12th of August, in fact, in Scotland, of course, you're likely to see desks all separated, as if it was like a test or an exam. Now, from an autistic point of view, some autistic people might quite like that because it means less social interaction, probably less noise, no one invading their personal space, nobody touching their pencil case and all that sort of thing. So that could be really great. In fact, you could even argue that some of these measures might help to create almost like an autistic dream school, the perfect school for some people. But on a negative side, your child might be away from friends. They might have been separated perhaps from their best friend, maybe. They might be in a group that's led by a teacher or an assistant with whom they're not really familiar, and that can obviously cause problems. If I just run through just a few other measures as well, just give you some ideas. Year groups will not be mixing with other year groups. They'll be in what's been commonly called on the media as a bubble. So they'll spend kind of all day huddled together, or socially distanced together, I should say. So that means that they're likely to have different break times to other year groups. They have different lunch times to other year groups. Also, the start and ending to times of the day might well be staggered as well. So, for example, year 10 and 11, for example, might be starting a little bit later or earlier than other year groups, for example. This also, of course, means that it's going to be staggered drop-off and collection times for parents as well. There's going to be, increased cleaning around the school. Now, with sensory sensitivities, that could cause problems. On a more positive side, classrooms are likely to be less cluttered, which some autistic children may like. For younger children or children perhaps with complex needs, they won't be allowed to use soft toys or soft furnishings or toys with intricate parts. And the reason behind that is because they're so difficult to keep clean, so they won't be allowed to do that. Also means that toys and so on won't be shared. And again, that's a sort of swings and roundabouts things. An autistic child might be able to use a favourite toy all day long, which will be great news for them. But it might be, of course, that they want something that somebody else has, and that'll be quite difficult maybe for them to understand. A whole range of other things. Classroom doors, for example, and windows may be kept open to try and keep the air coming through, provided that obviously fire safety regulations are being met. More frequent hand washing and longer hand washing, of course. Limited number of children going to the toilets and so on. One-way routes around the school as well. So corridors might be a one-way system. But of course, again, from an autistic point of view, and well, for everybody, in fact, it's important that that's really clearly visually explained. So there should be arrows perhaps on the floor or on the walls maybe. Perhaps there's a partition down the middle of the corridor if it is in fact two-way. It's also worth, there might also be fewer subjects in some cases. So for example, rather than having a class going to all these different classrooms with different teachers, schools might be kind of forced to some extent to reduce the curriculum a little bit there as well. I mean, as I say, that there are a whole range of these measures, some positive, some negative from an autistic point of view. But as I say, you can see them all on our back to school information on our website.
That's great, thanks Andy. And I think what's really important as well is to recognise that, as you say, every school will be different, and what parents could be doing is making those inquiries now, and what really schools and teachers should be doing, particularly in Scotland, given where they are, is communicating all of these changes really clearly so parents can be preparing their children for what is going to be different specific to that school when they go back. So thanks, Andy, and remember, have a look on our website for more details of those. Kieran, coming to you, what sort of steps has your school put in place for September to keep people safe, and what's going to be different for students coming into the school?
Well, it's a minefield, to be honest, and I think every school is so different. It depends if you're a boarding school, it depends if you're a day school, it depends if you're primary school to secondary school. The government haven't been entirely clear in what we're supposed to do. I mean, they've said that we're not to have PPE. They've said, from a staff point of view, from an autistic adult, I'm really anxious about going back. So we've obviously can't have that anxiety onto our children. So, the schools should have this plan in place now. And that's really important, especially for the children on the autistic spectrum. So the bubbles, as we know, it's not just year groups, depends on the size of the school. You can have up to 200 pupils in one bubble. So our school have got 215. So we could class that as a whole bubble if we wanted to, but we wouldn't, because that would be ridiculous, because if one child within that comes down with symptoms, and the whole bubble would have to isolate or go home. So it's making sure that the schools, that we have the hand sanitizing stations, we have our bubbles, we have the classrooms, certain bubbles use certain classrooms, and making sure that the parents know about this so they can sit down and go through those changes with the children. Again, communication is what's really important. And I'm lucky, our school's fantastic, and I think we're a smaller school, so we've got, a good support system in place that we communicate together. but there are concerns about the one-way systems and the more clinical approach that the schools are going to be under, and the government keep changing these rules, and that's not fair, because then how can we prepare? My son's 16 going into sixth form. I can't plan him. I can't prepare him to going into sixth form where it could change again, because they're talking about reducing certain like poetry out of English, for example, in one of the things. These children have been working so hard that, and children on the spectrum have already got that difficulty. They might not reach their full potential because of what other element might be in place. And now you're going to add this into the mix. It's just, I think it's getting me quite anxious talking about it. But it's just making sure that we put things in place and that we communicate to the parents so they can break it down, because they know their children best. They know how their children can react, and making sure that they feel empowered enough and that they are in control of how it's going to be. And parents need to have that say. If the parents aren't happy about something, speak to the schools, because we're there for the pupils. That's our job. And and it's not our fault either. It's a strange time, and and teaching online and teaching face to face, we're all doing things that is alien to us. We've got to make sure we do our best together. But I do worry about the cohort of year 10 to year 13 in particular. I think that and children going from primary to secondary school, like Hazel said with her daughter, I think that that throws different difficulties into the mix. So sorry, I've probably ranted a little bit.
No, and for you as an autistic woman, what have you done to prepare yourself for going back?
Okay, so I love my work, and my work is everything, and I've been there 20 years. I'll be lost without it, and I make it everything. So what I've been doing is I've been going in twice a week throughout the summer holidays, and I've been making masks, just to, so I can see people, so I can get myself familiar with the changes. So then if I know what the changes are, I can then relay that to the young people, our small cohort of young people on the autistic spectrum. And we've got probably about 15 to 20 pupils that are on the autistic spectrum, along with other conditions. So I think, yes, I'll be making the lip reading masks and giving them out to the local communities, because our children are going to go back into the local community. So I've been doing that so I can meet up with people, so I know what to expect, so I can have a look at the classrooms, I can see the work that's being done, so that I feel that I've got to reassure myself. And if I don't believe what we're doing is right, then how can I pass that on to our young people? I think, I'm honest, and sometimes too honest, that I find it difficult not to show that emotion on my face. So it's really important that I find out what's happening.
Well, and I think it sounds like an amazing dedication to your pupils and your job. And I think it sounds like the school are really lucky to have you. So thank you for sharing that. We also have 7 schools at the National Autistic Society across England, and they're all preparing for the return of pupils in September. We've got a host of ways that you can help young people that we support make life-changing breakthroughs, and we are currently recruiting for some really important roles in our schools across England. So we're going to take a look at one of our schools, Radlett Lodge School in Hertfordshire, and we're going to be looking at how you can help there.
At Radlett Lodge School, we're a specialist provision for children with the diagnosis of autism and other associated needs. There are 43 day places and 12 for residential, and we currently work with round about 25 different local authorities in the London and surrounding areas.
Over here at the lodge in the residential unit, we try to make sure that the children are doing all the things that they would do at home. So where would you take your children out to go on a trip, maybe to the cinema? We want to make sure they're incorporating all of that into their normal programme. We always make sure we try and find out what they want to do individually and make sure that we're putting that on their timetables and supporting them in every way we can.
We fully recognise that all children on the spectrum have a range of different needs, and we tailor the provision to each individual in that sense. So we work with them academically in terms of their social skills, in terms of their communication skills, and try and make sure that they make progress on a continuous basis in all those areas. We have very high staffing levels. Classes are very small. There is typically no more than 6 or 7 children in the class.
I find it really rewarding helping children with autism and supporting every need that they've got. It's a great day's work, and it's nice to go home and think back and know that you've helped someone today.
Welcome back, and just before we continue, Hazel's got to leave us, so I'd just like to take this chance to say thank you very much, Hazel, for joining us today, sharing all your tips, and good luck for the start of the new term. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
We're continuing with our show today about returning to school. If you've got questions as we go, please do include them in the comments. We'll be responding as we go. So, onward. Andy, what can parents do if their child refuses to return to school?
Okay, Tom. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think the first thing to say though is it's easy to lose sight, I think, as an adult, of how long all children have been out of school. Between 5 and 6 months since March out of school. And just very quickly, a bit of self-indulgence here. I'm a bit obsessed with time. Our experience of time is based on how long we've lived. So just to give you an idea, the lockdown time for an 8-year-old child will seem as long as 4 years to a 64-year-old person. And I mean, can you imagine sort of being out of work for 4 years or stopping parenting for 4 years? Going back would be a huge shock. For an autistic child, doubly, trebly, quadruply so, more difficult. For some autistic children, despite parents' best attempts at trying to reassure them that things are going to be okay, the prospect about going back to school can be almost sort of unbearable and can lead to what's commonly called school refusal, although there's a bit of controversy about that because it's not so much the child just sticking in their heels and saying, I don't want to go to school. It's that they almost physically can't tolerate school. So the key thing, of course, is to try and find out what aspects of school life it is that the child finds really, really difficult. Now, you might want to start with those 3 things that I mentioned earlier on, to go through reminding the child about the things that can be familiar about school, explaining what the new protective measures are going to be, and then sharing information with the school. That will help ease the way as well. But there's other strategies as well. So, for example, one idea is that you draw a map, or you ask the child to draw a map of the school, a plan. And then they can either colour code or number different areas of the school based on how happy or unhappy they feel in the school. So, or scary or unscary, if you like, whatever language they would prefer. And then when you've identified some areas where they are clearly stressed in school, trying to probe a little bit further and find out what is it about that. So is it a room? Is it the sensory sensitivities about a particular room? Is it the prospect of a particular lesson, or is it a particular member of staff, or is it worries about bullying, for example, or even is it fears around COVID-19? Obviously, every child's can be different. It could be a whole range of different reasons. To help you identify what the reasons are, again, on our website we have got some information on understanding your child's behaviour, which hopefully will help you with that. We've also got some information on what can I do if my child won't go to school, which goes into a lot more depth about the topic. We also have some information for teachers, which has a very long title, which is School Stress and Anxiety, How It Can Lead to School Refusal and Impact on Family Life. So that might be worth sharing with your son or daughter's school as well. And also different behaviour between home and school as well. I would urge parents not to just sort of email the school lots of guides and say, here you are, this is what the problem is. I would encourage parents just to look through those guides themselves and pick out a few things that they feel are relevant to their child's anxieties, and then try to arrange a meeting where they can discuss what the difficulties are, and then the school will hopefully come up with some solutions, some reasonable adjustments to try and ease that child's concerns.
Thanks, Andy. And then looking at it from the other direction, what if a school is refusing to let a child return, but the child wants to return?
Yeah, okay. So this would be likely to be an informal, unlawful exclusion. The government has made it really clear that, from September or from August the 12th for Scottish schools, all pupils are expected to go back to school. In fact, parents who don't send their child back to school, could face prosecution for non-attendance. So therefore, if a head teacher feels that a child's behaviour is a risk to themselves or others, for example, then the route that they should be following is school exclusion. But of course, that's got to be proportionate. You can't just exclude a child for thinking that maybe 3 weeks down the line they might do something that could be a bit risky. And there's very clear guidance. In England, we have the statutory guidance on exclusion, and in the other nations, they have similar guidance, rules that head teachers have to follow. If a child has an education healthcare plan in England, in section F, the school has to provide the provision that is stated in there. And if the child, of course, isn't in school, then that can't be provided. I think the main, what we're talking about really here, I think, is head teachers' concerns about safety. Every school has to produce a risk assessment following the pandemic to show that they are doing all that they reasonably can to try and reduce the risks. But what the Department for Education says, for example, I'll just quickly quote you something here. It says, risk assessments may prove useful when planning how best to support the return of individual children. So notice the emphasis there is on what can we do to try and enable children who might present with more challenging behaviour, how can we get them back into school? It should not be, a risk assessment shouldn't be a way of sort of cynically saying, your child can't, attend school. Just to finish with something else, there is that there's guidance on the Equality Act for England, Scotland, and Wales, which says that health and safety issues must not be used inappropriately to avoid making a reasonable adjustment. Schools should avoid making uninformed assumptions about health and safety risks. So the key thing here is, has the school considered what reasonable adjustments they can make to enable a child to go back to school? They should be proactive, anticipating, working with the families to try and work out how we can help this child cope with these strange new rules. I mean, if parents do have concerns about this, they might want to contact me at the School Exclusion Service or one of my fantastic volunteers. Or in other nations, our Education Rights Service can support parents in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales on school exclusion, but also on all aspects of education rights as well and support in schools. So I think we'll be providing some details of how to contact those services.
We certainly will. Thanks, Andy. And I think that's really, really important. And I hope everyone watching remembers that really the law is on your side. There are steps that all schools must be taking before they do anything. And if they're asking your child not to come back to school, that is an informal exclusion and is illegal. So you should be taking steps, should be getting advice from our website, from one of the helplines that Andy's just mentioned there, and we can help you in that situation because it isn't what schools should be doing, and your child has a right to their education, and it's really important to remember. So, Kiri Lynn, just coming back to you, how are the actual lessons at your school going to be delivered differently, and how is it going to make sure you still accommodate the needs of all your pupils, but both with hearing impairments and those with hearing impaired and autistic also?
Yeah, so we've already got certain things in place. So like we've also already got a horseshoe formation, and then which is where the desks are. So we just got to make sure that the pupil are they live together, so it's slightly different in a boarding school. So our bubbles are their boarding houses as well. So again, we just make sure that things are separate as best as possible. We make sure that all the pupils know what's going on, that the parents know what's going on, the teachers know what's going on. But we'll have things like the teaching staff will have their own keyboard that they'll go and use on the computers. They will move from classroom to classroom, the pupils might not. So yeah, again, it depends on individual schools. My son's school are doing something completely different. Because he's going into sixth form, they're bubbling the sixth form as a whole, and then he's got his own laptop. So again, and we've already spoken to the Senko there to make sure that he's got his own personal things himself. So it's making sure that each child is met individually, as well as trying to cater for the whole groups of children. But I do really think it's important that the teachers or teaching assistants, the Senko, should be reading up on all these guidance from the National Autistic Society and other charities and groups as well that support us, and that we know what we can do. I mean, the sensory overload itself is going to be very difficult. But again, in some ways it might be a lot easier. Like Andy said, some children might prefer to be separated from their peers, but again, it's that whole anxiety and how we're going to deal with that. So the risk assessments are extremely important to make sure that we're reducing the risk of COVID-19, but also we're reducing the risks of our children that are autistic, and that they are going to be happy as they can be coming back to an environment that is very different. And I think those risk assessments, those individual risk assessments, any teachers or teaching assistants should be making sure they read those and that they know how to support those individual children. I think that is more important, is treating the child as individuals. And if they can't attend a school because of their anxieties, this is what my son struggles really bad from anxiety, to the point where he's physically sick because of the unknown. So we don't know what September is going to be like for him, in that sense of the anxiety side of things. So, but working with the schools are really important, not working against the schools. You've got to be together on this. So it's, how can you prepare for the unknown? It's hard, but we're doing, every school and education provider should be doing their best, and hopefully they are.
Thanks, Kerry Lynn. And Andy, just coming back to you, we talked a bit in your previous response about education, health and care plans and Section F. What about the sort of non-school based support that children might have, such as speech and language therapy or occupational therapy? What's going to happen about that?
Well, I mean, there is a legal duty to ensure that special education provision in Section F of an education healthcare plan is provided, and Section F will often refer to essential therapies. So, for example, speech and language, occupational therapy, and where input from these therapists is specified in Section F, they must be provided. It's a tricky one. I mean, I spoke to a friend of mine who's actually an education psychologist, and he was talking about going back, resuming work, and in some schools they're sort of saying they've got a no visitors policy. But this, an education healthcare plan, for example, is a legally binding document, and if the child is entitled to that, then it must be provided in some way. But it will have to be adapted, of course. I mean, about that, I don't know how the protective measures that the professionals would use, but it still needs to be used. What I would urge parents to do is, if they've got any concerns about that, is probably to contact our Education Rights Service. If you phone up, you can choose a certain option depending on which nation you're from, and they can answer individual specific questions. I think on that really.
And just a final question, Andy. What is it that we've talked a lot today? But what is it that parents could be asking at the moment of their school? What's the most important thing?
Well, I suppose the key question is, what reasonable adjustments will you be making for my child? I think that's their right under the Equality Act, because autism is generally considered to be a disability in the eyes of the law, and it's their entitlement. And as I said before earlier on, that it is an anticipatory duty, so schools should be thinking in advance. So right now, your parents could actually contact the school and say, could you set out the reasonable adjustments you're going to make for my child, rather than sort of throwing that question at the school cold like that. Far better, of course, is to try and arrange that meeting where you discuss your ideas, what the concerns are, what the problems are, and then together you come up with solutions. That's far better. I mean, in terms of the protective measures, one concern, sort of number one in the charts, if you like, I always feel for reasonable adjustments, is that when a child is stressed and anxious, they often need a sort of get out solution, a safe space, somewhere quiet. They can go where they won't be interrupted and they can just become calm in their own time. They can self-regulate. Now, with all these protective measures that are going on, the concern is that all these little quiet rooms and so on will be taken up with separating groups of children. So again, I would get in early and say, can you make a reasonable adjustment for my child to provide a safe haven somewhere? And it might not be a physical room, it might be a pop-up tent. It might even be a blanket in some cases. Put a blanket over yourself just to cut off everything. It might be ear defenders, or is there some quiet corner of the classroom? Is it? But have you actually thought about this? What can you provide? And then, for all the protective measures, again, I'll go back to our website again, the back to school information for each one. For the parents' guidance, we've come up with some questions that parents can ask schools, but we've also got like a parallel document for teachers, which is very similar. But there we've listed the reasonable adjustments that schools could be making. So parents could use that to ask questions of the school. So, for example, can my child be allocated a particular piece of play equipment for their own use? Something just simple like that. But whatever they feel is most important to their child, really. If I could just quickly also say, as well as our back to school document, there's also a really good one from Whole School Send. It's called Returning to School After a Period of Absence. It was funded by the Department for Education. Again, lots of really good questions in there worth looking at.
Great, thanks, Andy. And again, just to remind everyone, all of those resources, we'll be sharing links to them at the end of the show. And really also just to say thank you to the Department for Education for their ongoing funding and support for our Schools Exclusion Service. It's great that we are able to provide such much needed service. Okay, well, that's the end of our show. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you found all the information shared helpful. We know that it's a difficult and anxious time for people as they transition back into school, so we hope that the information from today, the resources on our website, and the services the National Autistic Society can provide that Andy's talked about can help you during this difficult time. If you need to contact our Education Rights Service, you can do so. The details are on our website. But for any other queries around coronavirus or anything else related to autism, you can contact our general helpline. They are open Monday to Friday, 10 till 12 and 1 till 3. You can find out how to do this on our website. You can also contact them via email and via web form at autism.org.uk. I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our guests, Kiri Lynn, Andy, Hazel and her son Noah. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your excellent top tips. Good luck for the start of the new term. And finally, thank you to you, our viewers. Thank you for tuning in. Please do share this with anyone you think might find it helpful. Good luck for starting back at school. We know it's a difficult time. Do make use of the information on our website and the services that we provide. If you've missed any of today's show and you'd like to catch up, or any of our previous episodes, our coronavirus series, or our specials on employment, on our Father's Day special, on diagnosis, women and girls going out and about in public, you can find it all on our website at www.autism.org.uk/live. So that's everything. Until the next episode, please be safe. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye.